They say twins share a bond that transcends logic, but Maya and I? We were two sides of a coin that had been tossed into the gutter. Maya was the light, soft-spoken, brilliant, the kind of person who saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. I was the shadow, the one who learned early on that if you don't bite first, you'll spend your life being chewed up. Julian Thorne was the kind of man who collected trophies. My sister was his latest prize. He didn't start with violence. He started with isolation. He bought her off with gifts, then slowly replaced her friends with his own sycophants. He made her feel small, then convinced her that only he was big enough to keep her safe. I watched from the sidelines, furious, waiting for the crack in his armor. I knew I couldn't intervene directly. Maya was too deep in his narrative, too blinded by the love he'd manufactured for her. But then, it happened. It was a cold Tuesday evening. I was parked a block away from their townhouse, my engine idling, when I saw him shove her out the front door. She stumbled, falling hard onto the concrete. The sound of his laughter, that sharp, mocking bark, cut through the quiet night air. "You're nothing without me, Maya," he shouted, his voice dripping with venom. "Go ahead. Try to survive in the real world. You'll be back in an hour, begging." He slammed the door. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't the shove that broke me, it was the way she just sat there, weeping silently, too terrified to even stand up. I didn't rush to her, not yet. I watched as she eventually stood, shaking, and began to walk toward the bus stop. I waited until she was safe before I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The next day, Maya didn't answer her phone. Julian, however, didn't hesitate to message me. "She's learning her lesson," he wrote, accompanied by a picture of a shattered phone on the floor. He didn't know who he was talking to. He thought he was dealing with the timid, soft-hearted sister who stayed in the shadows. He didn't know that for the last 6 months, I hadn't been watching them, I had been studying him. I knew his business, his debts, his fragile ego, and his fear of losing the status he clung to so desperately. He thought he had broken the right twin. He had no idea he had just awakened the one who didn't know how to forgive. I pulled into a parking garage downtown, my laptop open on the passenger seat. I had spent weeks planting digital traps in his corporate network. Today, I was going to trigger the first one. I wasn't going to just make him pay. I was going to make him beg for mercy. And when he looked for someone to blame, he wouldn't find me. He would find his own reflection staring back at him from the dark. The game had officially begun. Maya was currently staying in a hotel, terrified and fragile, completely unaware that I was already inside Julian's world. It was surprisingly easy. Julian was so arrogant that he never bothered to learn the details of his own security protocols, delegating everything to his assistants. I had spent weeks mimicking his cadence, his vocabulary, and his digital footprint. I didn't need a disguise, I only needed to occupy his blind spots. I began by subtly unraveling his business. I didn't destroy it, not yet. Instead, I rerouted his internal communications, creating a series of glitches that made his subordinates question his sanity. I sent emails to his board of directors from his personal account, expressing doubts about his own leadership, then immediately retracted them. The internal chaos was delicious. But the real game was happening at his townhouse. I slipped into his home while he was out. I didn't steal anything. I moved things, a vase shifted 2 inches to the left, a book placed on the wrong shelf, a single red rose left in his shower. These were small, maddening pinpricks that told him someone had been in his private sanctuary, yet left no trace of a break-in. When he returned, I was watching from the darkened office of the building across the street. He walked in, his confidence radiating from his posture. 10 minutes later, he came running back out, his face pale, his eyes darting to every corner of the driveway. He looked broken, confused, and, most importantly, vulnerable. He pulled out his phone. I watched as he dialed Maya's number, his voice frantic, pleading. "Maya? Where are you? I think someone's in the house." Everything's different. I need you here. I felt a surge of cold triumph. He didn't want her back because he loved her, he wanted her back because he needed her to ground his reality. I decided to escalate. I accessed his home security feed and looped a pre-recorded sequence of an empty house. Then, I initiated a series of automated messages to his phone, mimicking Maya's voice. "You're nothing without me, Julian." The recording played, looping his own words from the night he kicked her out. He didn't just panic, he shattered. He started tearing his own living room apart, screaming at the walls, demanding to know who was playing these games. He looked exactly like the monster I had witnessed that Tuesday night, only this time, the monster was alone. I sat in the dark, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had the power to lock him out of his accounts, to freeze his assets, to dismantle his life with a single keystroke. But I wanted him to suffer first. I wanted him to feel the exact same helplessness he had forced upon my sister. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, the fun is just starting. Asterisk. I froze. I hadn't sent that. For the first time since this began, I felt a tremor of fear. Was I the only one hunting him? Or had Julian's past finally caught up to him, and was I now caught in the crossfire? The text message wasn't a glitch. It was an invitation. I traced the signal, not to a burner phone, but to a server farm in Switzerland. Whoever was messaging me wasn't a random hacker, they were an insider, someone who knew exactly what I was doing to Julian and why. I decided to meet them. Or rather, I decided to see who was watching. I left a digital breadcrumb trail leading to a coffee shop near Julian's office. I sat in a booth with a clear view of the entrance, my pulse steady. 10 minutes later, a woman walked in. She was sharp, professional, and moved with a cold, calculated precision that reminded me of my own tactical approach. She sat down across from me without asking. "You're sloppy, but your motivation is impeccable. Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Someone who has been waiting for Julian Thorne to slip up for 5 years," she said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "I'm not interested in your sister, and I'm not interested in your petty revenge. I'm interested in the company assets he's been laundering." I opened the envelope. It contained bank records, private photos, and a notarized document proving Julian had liquidated a charity fund intended for orphans to bankroll his startup. "Why give this to me?" I asked. "Because he knows you're his shadow now," she smirked. "He's hired a private security firm to track your digital footprints. He thinks you're an associate of his biggest business rival. He's already set a trap. If you continue on your current path, you'll be the one in a jail cell by morning." The reality hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on Julian's fragility that I'd ignored his reach. He wasn't just a sadist, he was a corporate criminal who had built a fortress of legal protection. "Help me take him down," I said. "Not just his money. His life." "I don't do life," she said, standing up. "I do liquidation. But if you provide the distraction, I'll provide the means to ensure he never holds power again." I left the cafe feeling the weight of the stakes. I was no longer just the protective sister, I was a pawn in a larger game of corporate warfare. That night, Julian called. He didn't sound frantic anymore. He sounded calm. Chillingly calm. "I know it's you," he whispered. "I don't know how you got inside my systems, but you made a mistake. You thought I was alone. You thought I was just a man who hurt your sister. But you don't know what I'm capable of when I'm cornered." "Is that a threat, Julian?" I asked, testing the line. "It's a promise," he replied. "I've invited your sister back to the house. She's upstairs right now. Why don't you come over? Let's have a family dinner. I think it's time we all stopped hiding." My heart stopped. He had Maya. He wasn't playing games anymore, he was going for the kill. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door. The trap was set, and I was walking straight into it, but I wasn't going as a victim. I was going as the woman who had already rewritten the rules of his world. The front door was unlocked. It was an invitation, a taunt, and a death warrant all wrapped in one. I entered the townhouse, my senses screaming. The house was unnaturally quiet. No music, no hum of appliances, just the sound of my own breathing echoing against the marble floors. I had my phone in one hand, ready to trigger the secondary protocol I'd discussed with the mysterious woman from the cafe. If I didn't send a signal by midnight, the entire corporate network would be wiped, and every fraudulent document would be automatically emailed to the district attorney. I reached the grand staircase. Up here, Julian's voice drifted down, cold and inviting. I found them in the master bedroom. Maya was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes glassy, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a doll, drugged, perhaps, or simply broken by the psychological onslaught. Julian stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. "You look stressed," Julian said, his eyes scanning my face for a crack. "I'm sure it's hard, trying to play God with a life you don't understand." "You're not a god, Julian," I said, stepping into the room. "You're a cornered rat who used a woman to feel important." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a remote. "I have security cameras, microphones, and a direct line to the police. I've already reported a break-in and an attempted extortion. By the time they arrive, you'll be the one in handcuffs, and I'll be the victim of a deranged woman who couldn't handle her sister's happiness." "Is that right?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Then why is your screen flashing red?" He frowned, glancing toward his desktop monitor in the corner. I had triggered it. The glitches weren't glitches anymore. I had bypassed his local security and broadcasted his own voice, admitting to the abuse, the fraud, and the kidnapping, onto every smart device in the house. His face turned an ash gray. He lunged toward the computer, but I was faster. I stepped between him and the desk, pulling a small drive from my pocket. "This isn't just the evidence of your fraud, Julian. It's the recording of you telling Maya exactly how you intended to dispose of her once she became a liability." His composure shattered. The mask of the calm, powerful executive dropped, revealing the desperate, snarling coward underneath. He moved to strike me, but Maya, my sweet, soft-spoken sister, suddenly stood up. She wasn't drugged. She wasn't broken. She was holding a heavy glass vase, her eyes cold with the same fire that had been burning in me for months. "He told me he'd kill you, Maya," Julian stammered, backing away. "I was protecting you." "You were protecting your own hollow ego," Maya whispered, her voice steady as iron. The house began to vibrate with the sirens of the approaching police. Julian looked at the door, then at us, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey, and he knew it. "You don't understand," he whimpered, his knees hitting the floor. "I'm a partner. I'm a success. You can't do this to me." "We're not doing anything to you, Julian," I said, looking down at him with icy detachment. "You did this to yourself." The front door kicked open. Blue and red lights flooded the room, turning the luxury suite into a crime scene. As the officers surged up the stairs, Julian didn't look at them. He looked at me, a pathetic, sobbing mess of a man who finally understood that his reign was over. The arrest of Julian Thorne was not a dramatic struggle, it was a clinical extraction. As the police led him out of his own townhouse in handcuffs, he looked at the house, his pristine, carefully curated monument to vanity, with the hollow, vacant expression of someone who had just realized his entire reality was a hallucination. He didn't scream. He didn't bargain. He simply folded, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the evidence I had spent weeks compiling. Maya and I stood on the sidewalk as the police cruisers pulled away. The night air, which had felt so heavy and suffocating just an hour ago, now felt crisp and clean. Maya leaned against me, her body finally relaxing for the first time in years. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It is," I replied, squeezing her hand. The company, the lawsuits, the reputation, everything he built is gone. And he's never going to hurt you again. In the weeks that followed, the story dominated the headlines. It wasn't just a domestic dispute, it was a massive corporate takedown. The shadow partner I had met in the cafe, the corporate rival, had followed through on her promise. Once the dam broke, the flood of Julian's financial crimes was unstoppable. By the end of the month, his name was toxic. His board of directors had distanced themselves, his offshore accounts were frozen, and his perfect life had been liquidated to pay the victims of his fraud. I never saw the woman from the cafe again. She had gotten what she wanted, a fallen competitor, and I had gotten what I needed, my sister's freedom. Maya spent the next few months healing. She moved to a small town on the coast, far from the city that had been her cage. She found a job she loved, she reconnected with friends she thought she'd lost, and most importantly, she learned to trust her own voice again. I returned to my own life, but it was fundamentally altered. The rage that had driven me to dismantle Julian's world had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, protective instinct. I realized that the bond between twins wasn't just about sharing a past, it was about the strength to rewrite the future when one of us was threatened. I still think about that night in the townhouse, the way Julian looked at us as he realized he had finally lost. It wasn't just his money or his status that he mourned, it was the realization that he had underestimated the very thing he claimed to despise, the quiet, unbreakable resilience of the women he had tried to break. I don't look over my shoulder anymore. There are no shadows to fear, no corporate secrets to protect, and no monsters to track. The game is over, the board is cleared, and for the first time in a long time, the mirror reflects nothing but the truth. Justice isn't always a courtroom verdict or a loud explosion. Sometimes, it's just the sound of a front door closing on a man who has nothing left to say. And for the first time, the silence is beautiful.